Martha and Charles found love at 60, a second chance at happiness most only dream of. But when their children rejected their marriage, what should have been a peaceful new chapter spiraled into a deadly nightmare no one saw coming. Martha. Blake had lived a quiet life for nearly 6 decades. After raising 2 daughters on her own, she had settled into a comfortable routine in her small Oregon town. She was known in the community as the kind retired nurse who volunteered at the Eerie local clinic and helped run the library's reading program for children. Her days were filled with simple pleasures, tending to her garden, baking pies for neighbors, and attending church on Sundays. Though she was content in her solitude, there was a quiet longing inside her, a wish for companionship that had grown stronger as the years passed. Charles Denton's life was much the same. Widowed 5 years earlier, he spent his days in a neat house a few blocks away. Charles was a former school principal, well respected in the community for his dedication and fairness during his 35 years working in education. Now retired, he filled his time with volunteer work at the senior center and weekly visits to the local bookstore, where he indulged his love of history. Like Martha, Charles had grown accustomed to living alone. He kept to himself and rarely spoke of his late wife, but there was a gentle sadness in his eyes that those who knew him noticed. The two had lived parallel lives, crossing paths occasionally, but never really speaking beyond polite greetings. That all changed one spring afternoon at the community gardening event held in the town's Central Park. The event was a yearly tradition where residents gathered to plant flowers and vegetables in public spaces. It was designed to bring people together, especially seniors like Martha and Charles, who often found themselves isolated. That day, Martha was carefully planting rows of bright marigolds when Charles approached with a warm smile. He complimented her on her gardening skills and offered to help with the heavier work of moving soil bags and setting up watering cans. Their hands brushed as they worked side by side, and an unexpected spark seemed to pass between them. It was the kind of connection that neither of them had felt in years, maybe decades. Over the next few weeks, they began to see each other more often. Sometimes it was a cup of coffee at the local cafe, other times a walk through the nearby woods or shared visits to the farmer's market. Their conversations flowed easily, filled with laughter and stories from their past. They found comfort in each other's company, as if all the years of loneliness were suddenly erased by the presence of the other. The town's residents started to notice the change. Martha's usually reserved demeanor softened, and she seemed lighter on her feet. Charles, too, smiled more often and spoke with a warmth that had been missing since his wife's passing. Some of their friends whispered that they had found happiness in their later years, a second chance at love that many believed was only for the young. For Martha and Charles, their relationship blossomed naturally, free from the pressures and expectations that had marked earlier chapters of their lives. Neither rushed anything. They took their time savoring each moment, whether it was sitting quietly on the porch watching the sunset or sharing a homemade meal at one of their houses. It was a companionship built on mutual respect, shared memories, and the simple joy of having someone to lean on. After nearly a year of dating, they made the decision to marry. It was a small affair, held in the botanical garden where they first truly connected. The ceremony was attended by close friends and a few neighbors, with sunlight filtering through the blooming trees and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of jasmine. Martha wore a simple lace dress, and Charles chose a crisp suit, both radiant with happiness. Their vows were quiet but heartfelt. They promised to support each other in good times and bad, to cherish the moments they had left, and to create new memories together. It was a beginning filled with hope and the belief that love could be rediscovered at any age. For a while, life felt perfect. The couple settled into their shared home, decorating it with flowers and photographs that reflected their combined histories. They took weekend trips to the coast and spent lazy afternoons reading side by side in their favorite chairs. Friends and neighbors often dropped by, sharing stories and laughter, and it seemed as though nothing could disturb their newfound peace. But beneath the surface, challenges loomed. Martha's daughters, Rebecca and Lila, lived far away and struggled to accept their mother's decision to marry again. They worried about Charles's intentions and feared that their mother was vulnerable and might be taken advantage of. Eric, Charles's son, shared similar doubts and resented the idea of a stranger becoming part of his father's life. The children's skepticism soon turned into open disapproval. At first, Martha and Charles tried to ignore the tension. They told themselves that their children just needed time to adjust, but the rejection weighed heavily on them. Phone calls went unanswered, visits were avoided, and family gatherings became awkward or were canceled altogether. The couple's happiness began to feel fragile, as if it could shatter with the slightest pressure. Still, Martha and Charles clung to their love. They reminded each other why they had chosen this path: the companionship, the warmth, the shared dreams. They believed that their children's doubts could be overcome, that with patience, the family could find a way to come together again. As the months passed, however, the divide only grew wider. The couple's home, once a place of laughter and light, became a battleground of silent resentment and unspoken fears. The community watched with a mixture of sympathy and unease, wondering if the happiness that had blossomed so beautifully could survive the storm that was gathering. And so, what began as a hopeful new chapter in the lives of two seniors quietly blossomed into a complex, tense story. One that would eventually take a dark and unexpected turn. The late-life romance that had seemed like a fairy tale was about to be tested in ways no one could have imagined. When Martha Blake and Charles Denton exchanged their vows in the quiet botanical garden, their hearts were full of hope. They imagined a future where love could heal old wounds, where companionship would replace loneliness, and where family would eventually come together to celebrate their happiness. But as the initial glow of their wedding faded, an invisible wall began to rise between them and their children, one that neither Martha nor Charles had fully anticipated. Martha's daughters, Rebecca and Lila, had always been fiercely protective of their mother. Having seen her raise them alone after their father's early death, they knew the strength and resilience it took for her to keep the family together. To them, Charles was an outsider. His arrival in their mother's life felt like an intrusion. They feared he might be after her savings, or the house she had worked so hard to maintain. Rumors swirled quietly at first, but soon they grew louder, fueled by suspicion and hurt. Rebecca was the older of the two sisters, a career-driven woman living in Seattle. She was blunt and practical, convinced that their mother's new marriage was a mistake. To her, Charles seemed too charming, too eager, almost as if he had rehearsed the role of the loving fiancé. Lila, younger by 3 years, was more emotional and protective in her own way. She called their mother frequently, urging her to reconsider, warning her of possible betrayal. Neither sister made an effort to conceal their distrust. Their messages became increasingly cold, their visits shorter and less frequent. Across state lines, Charles's son Eric was wrestling with his own fears. He had grown up watching his father's life unravel after the death of his mother. Charles had become withdrawn, and Eric was determined to protect what was left of his family's legacy. The news of his father's remarriage felt like a personal betrayal. He worried Martha's presence would erase the memory of his mother, and that his inheritance might be at risk. Eric was meticulous. He began gathering information about Martha's financial situation, and even spoke to lawyers about contesting the will if necessary. The children's disapproval wasn't just limited to words. It manifested in actions that slowly chipped away at the couple's peace. Rebecca hired a private investigator to delve into Charles's background, hoping to find some dirt that would prove he was untrustworthy. Eric, meanwhile, filed legal motions to challenge any changes to his father's estate plans. Lila made unannounced visits, sometimes showing up at Martha's door without warning, pressing her to annul the marriage, or at least delay it until the family could talk things through. Martha and Charles tried to weather the storm with dignity. They responded politely to emails and phone calls but avoided confrontations. To outsiders, they appeared calm and composed. Yet behind closed doors, the tension was suffocating. Martha found herself crying late at night, overwhelmed by the feeling that the family she had fought to protect was slipping through her fingers. Charles, once confident and kind, grew quieter and more withdrawn, retreating into his study or the garden to escape the constant barrage. Neighbors noticed the change too. The once lively gatherings at their home became rare. Friends who had come to celebrate their marriage now hesitated to visit, unsure how to offer support without getting caught in the crossfire. The community that had once admired the couple's late-in-life romance watched with growing concern as whispers of family strife spread. One incident in particular marked a turning point. An anonymous tip led to a welfare check at Martha and Charles's home. Social services arrived unannounced, investigating claims of elder abuse. Though no evidence was found, the visit shook the couple deeply. The humiliation of being suspected, the fear that their private struggles were now public knowledge, left scars that would not heal easily. After that day, Martha stopped going to her volunteer groups. Charles cancelled his weekly gardening class. Their world became smaller, confined to the walls of their home where silence often replaced conversation. The emotional isolation they felt was compounded by the physical separation from their children, who increasingly cut off communication altogether. The children's rejection was a wound that deepened with time. Family holidays passed without invitations or calls. Birthday cards went unanswered. Attempts by mutual friends to mediate were met with stubborn refusals from both sides. It seemed as if the family was fracturing beyond repair. Despite everything, Martha and Charles clung to their commitment. They leaned on each other in ways they never had before. Their love, once a source of joy, now became a fragile shield against the harsh reality closing in around them. They made plans for small trips, tried to rekindle old hobbies, and reminded themselves of the life they still had together. But the cracks in their foundation were widening. The most painful blow came when Martha's daughters sent a formal letter demanding she reconsider the marriage and warning of legal action if she did not comply. It was cold, calculated, and utterly devoid of the warmth one would expect from a family. Charles's son echoed similar threats, adding to the growing sense of siege that surrounded the couple. In the months that followed, the couple's home transformed from a sanctuary into a battleground. Phone calls from lawyers replaced friendly check-ins. Letters from family members grew hostile. The couple felt watched, judged, and increasingly alone. For the first time in their lives, Martha and Charles faced a new kind of loneliness, one created not by time or circumstance, but by the very people they had loved most. The rejection they endured was a slow burning fire, consuming their hope and replacing it with fear and doubt. Yet, amid the turmoil, the couple's bond remained. It was the one thing they could hold on to when everything else seemed lost. They clung to memories of the first days of their romance, the shared laughter, and the quiet moments of understanding. It was this love that kept them going, even as the walls closed in. But love alone could not protect them from the growing storm. The tension between the couple and their children escalated until it reached a breaking point. The legal battles, the emotional attacks, and the relentless suspicion created a pressure cooker situation. What had begun as a hopeful union was now a toxic conflict threatening to unravel everything. The community watched helplessly, unsure how to intervene. Friends tried to offer support but found themselves caught between loyalties. Even the local clergy attempted to mediate. But the wounds were too deep, the mistrust too strong. And so, the story of Martha and Charles, two seniors who found love, late in life, became a cautionary tale of family rejection and fractured bonds. The dream they had dared to chase was slipping through their fingers, swallowed by bitterness and pain. Unbeknownst to everyone, this was just the beginning of a tragedy that would shock the town and forever change the lives of those involved. What no one could predict was how far the broken ties and unanswered questions would lead into darkness, despair, and a crime that no one saw coming. As the tension between Martha, Charles, and their children escalated, the fragile peace that had once existed shattered completely. What had started as cold disapproval turned into a relentless and invasive campaign by the children against the couple's new life together. Martha and Charles found themselves trapped in a whirlwind of legal battles, spying, and family interference that slowly but surely tore at the fabric of their relationship. Rebecca, determined to protect her mother, had hired a private investigator to uncover anything suspicious about Charles's past. The investigator followed Charles discreetly, monitored his daily routine, and even spoke with neighbors under the guise of casual conversation. The goal was to find proof that Charles was a fraud, someone who might be manipulating Martha for financial gain. Weeks passed, and the investigator came back empty-handed, reporting that Charles had no criminal history or shady dealings. But Rebecca refused to accept the clean record. She was convinced there was something beneath the surface. Meanwhile, Eric's legal challenge against Charles became a constant source of stress. He filed a petition to contest any changes in the will and sought a court order to have a trustee oversee Charles's finances. The paperwork flooded the couple's mailbox, each letter more aggressive than the last. The court dates and lawyer meetings disrupted their routine and drained their energy. Charles, once a man of order and calm, became visibly anxious, his hands trembling as he sifted through the growing pile of legal documents. Lila's approach was more direct and confrontational. She began making unannounced visits to their home, demanding to speak with Martha alone. She pleaded with her to reconsider the marriage, warning of the family's anger and potential consequences. Martha, who had once welcomed her daughters warmly, now found herself closing the door on Lila's face. The repeated invasions of privacy left her feeling vulnerable and exhausted. She had married Charles for love and companionship, not to become a pawn in a bitter family feud. The couple's neighbors started to notice the change in their behavior. Once the center of neighborhood gatherings, Martha and Charles now kept to themselves. Their porch light, which had burned brightly each evening, was often left off. Visitors became rare, and when friends dropped by, they found the house quieter than usual. The warmth that had once radiated from the couple seemed to have dimmed under the weight of constant conflict. Then came the anonymous report that would mark a dark turning point. A concerned citizen called social services with allegations of elder abuse. The claim was that Charles was mistreating Martha, that she appeared frightened and withdrawn when she was seen in public. Social workers arrived unannounced one morning, entering the house to perform a welfare check. For Martha and Charles, the visit was humiliating and deeply distressing. They knew the accusations were false, but the damage had already been done. Word spread quickly in the small town, and whispers of scandal followed them wherever they went. Despite the social workers' findings that no abuse had occurred, the incident left a stain on the couple's reputation. Some neighbors began to avoid them, uncertain what to believe. Martha stopped attending her volunteer work at the clinic, fearing judgment and gossip. Charles canceled his weekly gardening class, no longer able to face the small group that had once been his refuge. Their world shrank even further. The couple tried to hold on to their relationship amid the chaos. They spent long evenings talking, quietly, seeking comfort in each other's presence. Yet the stress was taking a toll. Martha, who had always been the stronger of the two, found herself slipping into bouts of sadness and anxiety. Charles, whose patience and resilience had once seemed limitless, grew irritable and withdrawn. The lightness of their early romance faded into a heavy cloud of worry and despair. The hostility from their children did not wane. Rebecca and Lila continued to send letters filled with accusations and demands. Eric's legal maneuvers escalated, and his visits to their home became confrontational. The couple was caught in a relentless storm with no end in sight. Neighbors who cared wanted to help, but felt powerless. The community's role shifted from celebration to observation, watching a family unravel in real time. Some offered quiet, words of support, while others kept their distance, unsure how to intervene without making things worse. The pressure culminated in a particularly tense moment, when Rebecca attempted to force her way into Martha and Charles's home. She arrived unexpectedly, with a key she claimed had been given to her by a neighbor. Martha refused to let her in, and the confrontation escalated until police were called. Though no charges were filed, the incident left everyone shaken. Isolation deepened. The couple's social circle dwindled as friends struggled to navigate the increasingly toxic family dynamics. Martha stopped answering calls from her daughters. Charles stopped responding to Eric's messages. Their home became a fortress, a place where silence filled the spaces once occupied by laughter. Amid the turmoil, the couple clung desperately to their shared memories. They revisited old photographs and letters, reminding themselves of the love that had brought them together. But the outside world kept pressing in, threatening to crush the fragile happiness they had found. The emotional strain was evident in their health. Martha's once steady hands began to tremble and Charles lost weight rapidly. Medical checkups revealed rising blood pressure and signs of chronic stress. Doctors warned that if the tension continued, it could have fatal consequences. One evening, a neighbor passing by saw Martha sitting on the porch steps, staring blankly into the distance. The sight was heartbreaking. It was a woman weighed down by grief and rejection, a stark contrast to the vibrant person she had been just months before. The legal battles dragged on. Court hearings, affidavits, and endless paperwork consumed what little energy Martha and Charles had left. The strain turned their home into a place of anxiety rather than refuge. Despite the chaos, Martha and Charles never stopped loving each other. Their bond was their anchor, a flicker of light in a darkening world. But the pressures from their fractured family life pushed them toward a breaking point they never imagined reaching. The story that had begun with hope and love was now a tale of conflict and pain. The rejection by their own children was not just emotional. It was a force that changed everything. The couple's dreams of a peaceful life together were slipping away under the weight of suspicion, anger, and betrayal. What no one realized yet was how far the consequences would reach, and how the family's bitterness would lead them down a path none could have foreseen. The events unfolding in the quiet Oregon town were setting the stage for a tragedy that would shock everyone. A tragedy born not just of love lost, but of love rejected and twisted into something far darker. The strain on Martha and Charles's marriage grew heavier with each passing day. What once felt like a fresh start and a new chapter had become a relentless battle against forces both external and internal. Their children's disapproval had transformed from cold rejection into active hostility, and the emotional scars it left were beginning to fester in ways no one expected. Martha woke up one morning feeling a strange sense of foreboding. The house, usually a refuge from the outside world, now seemed suffocating. The walls echoed with silence, broken only by the distant hum of passing cars. Charles sat at the kitchen table, his eyes fixed on a pile of unopened mail, the weight of their ongoing legal disputes etched deeply into his face. That day, a letter arrived from Eric's attorney. It was the latest in a series of increasingly aggressive legal documents demanding that Charles relinquish control of his assets and submit to financial oversight. The letter implied suspicion of mismanagement and hinted at possible elder abuse, a claim that shocked and angered Charles to his core. He had spent his life as a principled educator, dedicated to fairness and integrity. Now he was being treated like a criminal in his own home. Martha, meanwhile, was battling her own demons. Her daughter's refusal to accept her new life left her feeling isolated and deeply hurt. She had hoped that, over time, love and patience would heal the wounds. Instead, she found herself cut off from her own family, labeled selfish and reckless for choosing happiness at her age. The loneliness gnawed at her, and sometimes she wondered if the pain was worth the love she shared with Charles. One afternoon, a neighborhood meeting was called by concerned citizens who had heard rumors of the family's turmoil. The purpose was to find a way to support Martha and Charles and to bring the community closer together. The meeting was held in the local church hall, where familiar faces gathered to discuss the unfolding drama with a mixture of sympathy and apprehension. The meeting. Some neighbors expressed frustration at the couple's reluctance to seek help or to reconcile with their children. Others warned against taking sides too quickly, emphasizing that family disputes were often complicated and private. A few offered suggestions, counseling services, mediation, or even legal advice to help ease the tension. Martha and Charles attended the meeting, hoping it might be a step toward peace. But as they listened to the well-meaning but distant voices of friends and strangers, a sinking feeling settled in their chests. They realized how alone they had become, how much the conflict had consumed their lives, and how little control they had over the damage being done. Back at home, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken fears. One evening, Charles noticed Martha's hands trembling as she tried to fix dinner. He urged her to rest, but she refused, not wanting to show weakness. The stress of the past months had taken a toll on both of them physically and emotionally. Charles was haunted by nightmares about losing everything he had left: his home, his dignity, and most of all, Martha. In the quiet moments, they talked about what the future might hold. They dreamed of moving away, starting fresh somewhere, new far from the judgment and hostility. But each idea was met with practical obstacles: money, health concerns, and the fear of cutting ties completely with the lives they had built over decades. Then came the most unexpected blow. One morning, as Martha was watering the garden, she spotted a car slowly driving past their house. The vehicle stopped briefly before continuing down the street. It was Eric, making yet another unannounced visit. This time, he was accompanied by two men who introduced themselves as legal representatives. The men entered the house with authority, producing documents that claimed Charles was no longer mentally fit to manage his affairs. They demanded immediate access to his financial records and insisted on accompanying him to a medical evaluation. The situation escalated quickly, with Charles protesting vehemently but feeling powerless in the face of official intervention. Martha stood silently by, her heart breaking as she watched her husband struggle against the onslaught. The humiliation was unbearable. Their home, once a sanctuary of love and laughter, now felt like a battleground where their every move was scrutinized and questioned. That evening, after the visitors left, Martha found Charles sitting quietly in his favorite chair, staring at the floor. The fight had drained him. He confessed that he felt trapped and betrayed by his own son, someone he had raised with care and love. Martha held his hand tightly, promising that they would face whatever came together. But the pressure continued to mount. The legal battles dragged on, with more court dates, medical evaluations, and endless paperwork. Their finances, once stable, were strained by mounting legal fees. The couple's friends began to drift away, unwilling or unable to navigate the increasingly toxic family conflict. One night, as Martha lay awake, she felt a sudden sharp pain in her chest. She brushed it off as stress or indigestion, but the discomfort lingered. Over the next few days, the pain grew worse, and she found herself short of breath. Charles insisted she see a doctor, and reluctantly she agreed. The diagnosis was grim. Martha had a serious heart condition that required immediate treatment and lifestyle changes. The news was devastating. The stress from the family turmoil had likely contributed to her declining health. Charles vowed to be her caregiver, but the burden weighed heavily on them both. Martha's hospitalization marked a turning point. During her stay, the distance from their children became painfully apparent. No calls, no visits, no messages of concern. The rejection was total. Charles felt a profound loneliness as he sat by her bedside, holding her hand through restless nights. When Martha returned home, fragile and needing constant care, the couple's situation became even more precarious. The house that once echoed with the sounds of love and shared dreams was now filled with medical equipment, pill bottles, and whispered worries. The final blow came unexpectedly. One morning, Charles discovered that their joint bank account had been frozen by court order, following Eric's legal petition. Their funds were inaccessible, leaving them unable to pay for Martha's treatments, or even daily necessities. It was a financial strangulation that left them desperate and frightened. In the weeks that followed, the couple faced a bleak reality. Their children's rejection was no longer just emotional. It was a calculated effort to control and isolate them. The love that had once brought Martha and Charles together was being suffocated by bitterness and greed. Neighbors watched helplessly. As the couple's health declined and their spirits waned, the small town, once filled with hope for their late-life romance, now whispered about a family torn apart by jealousy and cruelty. And in the darkest corners of their lives, where fear and despair mingled, a terrible question began to take root. How far would this conflict go? How much pain could two people endure when those they loved most turned against them? What was supposed to be the golden years of their lives had become a nightmare, one that was building toward a shattering and tragic conclusion no one could have imagined. The tension that had gripped Martha and Charles's lives for months reached a breaking point one bleak autumn evening. The small town, once a quiet backdrop to their hopeful union, was now the stage for a tragedy that stunned everyone who knew the couple. Martha was struggling with her health. The heart condition that had worsened under the strain of stress was now demanding constant care. Charles, once energetic and steadfast, was increasingly frail, worn down by the relentless battles against their children and the crushing weight of isolation. The house that had been their sanctuary had become a place shadowed by fear and sorrow. Despite everything, they held on to their love, the one thing that had brought light to their later years. But even that love could not shield them from the growing storm. The day began like any other. Martha was resting in her favorite armchair, wrapped in a soft blanket, while Charles sat nearby, reading quietly. The house was silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the mantel and the distant sounds of the neighborhood winding down for the night. Suddenly, the peace was shattered by a loud knock at the door. Charles hesitated, glancing nervously at Martha. Visitors had become a source of anxiety ever since Eric's legal team had begun making frequent and unwelcome appearances. Opening the door revealed Rebecca and Lila, Martha's daughters, faces stern and unyielding. They had come with firm intentions and a demand for immediate access to their mother's medical records and financial documents. The confrontation quickly escalated. The daughters accused Martha and Charles of withholding information and questioned the legitimacy of the marriage, hinting that it was a manipulative scheme. Charles, his voice trembling but firm, refused to comply without proper legal procedures. The daughters, frustrated and angry, raised their voices, and the tension spilled over into a heated argument. The scene disturbed neighbors who had gathered nearby, drawn by the commotion. In the midst of the chaos, Martha, overwhelmed and weak from her condition, attempted to intervene but collapsed suddenly. Charles caught her just in time, but the moment was terrifying. Emergency services were called, and Martha was rushed to the hospital. At the hospital, doctors stabilized her, but the incident left a mark on everyone involved. The daughters blamed, the situation on Martha and Charles's refusal to cooperate, while the couple felt betrayed and abandoned. The family fractures deepened. While Martha was recovering, Charles was left alone to face another barrage of legal threats. Eric intensified his efforts to gain control over his father's estate, hiring more lawyers and filing new motions. The rise. Constant stress eroded Charles's health further, and he began to show signs of severe anxiety and depression. The community's sympathy, which had once been with Martha and Charles, was now divided. Some neighbors condemned the children's harshness, while others viewed the couple's resistance as stubbornness that only worsened the situation. The line between victim and aggressor blurred in the eyes of many. One afternoon, as Charles returned home from the hospital, he found the front door slightly ajar. Inside, the house was in disarray. Personal belongings were scattered, drawers left open, and papers torn. It was clear that someone had broken in. A quick call to the police confirmed that the break-in was likely connected to the ongoing family feud. Though nothing was stolen, the violation left Charles feeling unsafe in his own home. He installed new locks and security cameras, but the sense of security was gone. That night, the weight of the events bore down on Charles. Alone in the quiet house, he contemplated the bitter reality. The family he had hoped to rebuild was fractured beyond repair. The love he shared with Martha was now shadowed by fear, loss, and constant conflict. Days later, Martha was discharged from the hospital, but remained fragile. Charles devoted himself to her care, but the financial freeze on their accounts left them struggling to afford medication and essentials. The legal battles dragged on, and the couple's resources dwindled. 1. Morning, a neighbor found Charles sitting on the porch looking exhausted and defeated. The man offered to help, bringing food and offering support. Charles accepted quietly, grateful for any kindness amid the darkness. But even the neighbor's good intentions could not stop the spiral. The stress took a toll on Charles's mind. He became forgetful, anxious, and increasingly withdrawn. Martha's condition worsened, and the pressure mounted. Then came the shocking climax. Late one evening, a neighbor heard raised voices and sounds of a struggle from the Blakes' home. Concerned, the neighbor called the police. Officers arrived to find a scene that would haunt the town for years. Charles was found holding Martha, who was unresponsive. Emergency responders rushed Martha to the hospital, but it was too late. She had passed away. The investigation that followed revealed a tangled web of pain and desperation. Charles, overwhelmed by the relentless rejection, financial ruin, and his wife's declining health, had reached a breaking point. Evidence suggested that the final moments had been a tragic accident, an argument that escalated into violence, fueled by years of emotional turmoil. Charles was charged with manslaughter. The trial laid bare the bitter family feud, the legal battles, and the devastating impact of rejection and greed. Testimonies painted a picture of two seniors caught in a cruel web of their children's distrust and cruelty. The community was divided in their reactions. Some saw Charles as a victim of unbearable circumstances, while others believed justice had to be served. The daughters and Eric faced criticism for their relentless pursuit of control and their cold treatment of their aging parents. The trial ended with a verdict that balanced punishment with compassion. Charles was sentenced to a reduced term, reflecting the tragic nature of the case and the years of hardship he had endured. The judge called for family counseling and community support to prevent similar tragedies in the future. In the aftermath, The town grappled with the lessons of Martha and Charles's story. It was a harsh reminder of how rejection, mistrust, and unresolved conflict could destroy lives. The couple's late-in-life love had sparked hope, but was ultimately consumed by bitterness and pain. Martha's funeral was small but heartfelt, attended by neighbors and friends who mourned the loss of a kind woman caught in a tragic family storm. Charles, though broken, found moments of peace in the quiet remembrance of the love they had shared. The house on the corner remained a silent testament to a love that had burned brightly but ended in heartbreak. The community vowed to remember Martha and Charles not just for the tragedy, but for the courage they showed in choosing love late in life, a courage that, despite everything, deserved respect and compassion. Their story became a cautionary tale, a somber reminder that love, no matter the age, can face obstacles too heavy to bear without understanding, forgiveness, and support from those closest to us. And in the quiet corners of the town, where whispers of the past still lingered, the memory of Martha and Charles remained. Two souls who found each other too late, only to be torn apart by the very family that should have held them closest.